The children gather in circles, innocent voices rising in unison. "Ba ba, black sheep, have you any wool?" They sing happily, completely unaware they're saying a 700-year-old cry of economic oppression, a coded protest against a tax system so brutal it left whole villages starving. To them, it's a playful rhyme about a sheep and its wool, but to medieval families, it was a lifeline of memory, carrying their suffering forward in disguise. What sounds like nonsense today was once a dangerous truth, whispered in plain sight. Once you understand what those 3 bags of wool really mean, the happy song turns into something much darker. This isn't a story about a generous sheep sharing its bounty. This is the carefully preserved memory of one of medieval England's most devastating financial weapons against its own people. The year is 1275. King Edward I has just returned from the Crusades, and the royal coffers are empty. Wars in the Holy Land have drained England's wealth, and Edward needs money, desperately. Edward's war-torn banners flutter as his retinue enters London, but there's no treasure caravan behind him, no gold from Jerusalem, no spoils of holy war. Instead, he carries crushing debts to Italian bankers who funded his campaign, debts that threaten to topple the English crown itself. His advisors gather in Westminster's torchlit chambers, spreading ledgers across oak tables, and the numbers tell a story of impending disaster. The kingdom owes more than it can possibly repay. But one advisor points to England's true wealth, not in gold mines or conquered territories, but in the millions of sheep dotting the countryside. Wool, England's white gold, the commodity that Flemish merchants crave, that Italian traders sail across treacherous seas to acquire. Edward takes his quill, heavy with the weight of what must be done, and signs a law called the Great Custom, a wool tax that will take money from every shepherd from the Scottish borders to the Cornish coast. Under this new law, every shepherd must surrender 1/3 of their wool to the crown. Another third goes directly to the church. The final third, if they're lucky, stays with the farmer. And here, buried in the innocent verses of a children's song, lies the mathematical precision of medieval exploitation. A simple rhyme was really a record of how the powerful took and divided what they wanted. 3 bags full, the sheep declares. 1 for the master, that's King Edward, taking his royal share. 1 for the dame, the church, always with its hand extended for God's portion. And 1 for the little boy who lives down the lane, the common farmer, relegated to a child in his own story, powerless against the twin authorities, bleeding him dry. But why a black sheep? Black wool held particular significance in medieval England, a detail that makes the rhyme's choice of a black sheep even more pointed. Unlike white wool, black wool could be woven into dark cloth without expensive dyes. In the great trading halls of Bruges, Flemish merchants would pay triple the price for English black wool. They called it the devil's fleece because it was so rare and could make cloth so dark it seemed to absorb light. Venetian nobles commissioned entire wardrobes of black, a colour that symbolised both wealth and power, possible only through England's rare black sheep. The irony is deep. English shepherds raised the sheep that clothed Europe's rich, yet they themselves wore rough, undyed, and coarse, homemade clothes. A single black sheep could produce enough wool for a cloak that would sell for more than a shepherd's yearly earnings. Yet when the tax collectors came, they took the black wool with the same ruthless efficiency as the white. The shepherd who had nurtured that rare bloodline, who had protected that precious black sheep through wolves and winter, watched his prize vanish into sacks marked with the royal seal. Even this, literally the most valuable thing a poor farmer might possess, wasn't enough to grant him mercy from the tax. The rhyme's black sheep represents the very best these farmers had to offer, and even that wasn't enough to spare them from exploitation. For centuries, this secret lay dormant in the rhyme, its revolutionary origins forgotten as the wool tax faded into history. Children continued to sing it, parents continued to teach it, and nobody questioned why we were asking a sheep about the distribution of its wool. The protest had outlived the thing it protested against, becoming a ghost story that didn't know it was dead. Yet behind the fleece and the numbers lurks something darker, because this story was never just about wool. Follow the thread long enough, and it leads not to markets or kings, but to the haunting cries of those who paid the price in silence. Picture this child, not a metaphor, but a real shepherd's son in a Yorkshire village, Winter of 1276. His father has just watched the king's collectors load 2/3 of the year's wool onto carts. The boy stands barefoot in the frozen mud, understanding with the clarity only hunger brings that those bags contain his family's survival. The wool that should have been traded for grain, for firewood, for the simple things needed to live. It's gone. His tears aren't poetic. They're the salt, bitter tears of a child who will go to bed hungry tonight, and tomorrow night, and every night until spring if he survives that long. Medieval records tell us that, in the years following the Great Custom, child mortality in wool-producing regions spiked dramatically. The crying boy wasn't a literary device. He was thousands of children whose parents' work was stolen by law, whose tears froze on their cheeks in cold huts, while rich people wore expensive fur and bishops counted their money. The rhyme spread through England's villages like wildfire, but not as entertainment. This was subversion disguised as a children's song. You couldn't stand in the town square and denounce the king's taxes. That was treason, punishable by death. But you could teach your children a simple rhyme about a black sheep. In a thatched cottage in Gloucestershire, a mother rocks her infant by the dying embers of a fire they can't afford to feed. Outside, she hears the creak of wagon wheels, the tax collectors making their rounds. Her husband has already hidden what little wool they've managed to keep, buried it beneath the floorboards, knowing that discovery means the stocks, or worse. She hums softly to keep the baby quiet, and the words that escape her lips sound like a lullaby. Ba, ba, black sheep. Have you any wool? The collectors pass by, hearing only a mother's gentle song. They don't recognize the accusation hidden in those innocent syllables. Down the lane, her neighbour takes up the tune, then another. By nightfall, the whole village is humming this song of protest, and the authorities are not aware of anything. The genius of it, encoding sedition in a children's verse, meant that even when sung directly in front of the sheriff's men, it sounded like nothing more than childish nonsense. You could make sure that the injustice would be remembered, even if it had to hide behind an innocent face. But the brilliance of the rhyme didn't just stop with it surviving. It grew into something far more powerful. What began as a whisper of defiance in village cottages soon became a weapon no sheriff, bishop, or king could silence. Every time a child sang those words, they were unknowingly participating in an act of rebellion. The authorities couldn't arrest someone for teaching a nursery rhyme. They couldn't kill parents for sharing a song about sheep. And so the protest survived, generation after generation, its true meaning buried just deep enough to escape detection, but shallow enough to be uncovered when the time was right. The genius of encoding protest in a children's rhyme becomes clear when you consider the alternatives. Written complaints could be traced, public speeches could be silenced. But a nursery rhyme, it spreads naturally from parent to child, impossible to stop, impossible to trace back to its source. The oppressed had weaponized innocence itself. In 1986, parents in Birmingham opened their morning papers to find the headline, "Council bans black sheep as racist." The story that followed seemed like a joke, but it was completely serious. Islington Council had directed its nursery schools to cease teaching the traditional rhyme, replacing black sheep with happy sheep, or, more bizarrely, rainbow sheep. A mother interviewed outside a London primary school told reporters she was delighted by the change, explaining that her mixed-race daughter had been confused and hurt by the word black being linked to giving away things. Meanwhile, a grandfather, who had learned the rhyme from his own grandfather, stood bewildered at the school gates, asking anyone who would listen how a song about medieval taxation had suddenly become a racist manifesto. The BBC ran debates. The tabloids screamed about political correctness gone mad. Academic committees were formed, and all the while, the actual history of the rhyme, its origins as a protest against genuine oppression, was completely ignored in favour of a manufactured controversy that revealed more about 1980s anxieties than any medieval meaning. Kindergartens rewrote the lyrics, "Ba ba, rainbow sheep, ba ba, happy sheep," anything to avoid the supposedly offensive colour reference. Yet behind the noise of rainbow sheep and rewritten lyrics, a far more unsettling truth was waiting to be rediscovered, one that modern outrage had completely overlooked. Historians who rushed to examine the rhyme's origins found something that should have been obvious. There was absolutely no connection to slavery, no racial coding, no hidden prejudice. The moral panic of the 1980s had created a scandal that never existed. putting modern worries onto a medieval tax protest. The real oppression in the rhyme, the crushing economic exploitation of an entire population, was ignored in favour of an imaginary offence that required no actual historical knowledge to condemn. The irony is staggering. Here was a real object of resistance against tyranny, a smart way of hiding economic injustice that had survived 7 centuries, and modern society's response was to clean it up based on a completely fake interpretation. We took a protest song against actual oppression and neutered it because we imagined an oppression that was never there. What does it say about us that we were so quick to erase black from Black Sheep, but never questioned why a children's song clearly describes a system where 2/3 of someone's work is taken away? We changed the colour, but kept the structure of exploitation intact. We worried about made-up racism while continuing to teach children, in a singing voice, the way feudal taxes work. Today, when children sing "Ba Ba, Black Sheep," they're performing a historical reenactment they don't understand. Every time it's said, it's a ghost story, a voice from the 13th century still crying out about an injustice that destroyed lives and communities. The farmers who created this rhyme as their only form of protest could never have imagined it would outlive the English monarchy's absolute power, the Catholic Church's temporal authority, and the very economic system it criticised. The rhyme endures because its creators understood something fundamental. Power might control the present, but it cannot control memory if that memory is hidden cleverly enough. They put their truth in the one place authority figures would never think to look, in the mouths of children, in the world of innocence, in songs so simple they seemed unworthy of notice. And perhaps that's the rhyme's final lesson, not about wool or taxes or even protest, but about the power of stories to carry truth across centuries. The shepherds of 1275 couldn't have fought King Edward's tax collectors, but they could ensure their children would remember the injustice. They couldn't reclaim their wool, but they could claim their story. And in the end, the story outlasted the tax, the king, and the entire medieval world that created it.